here at LaGuardia Community College for this special guest lecture. I just want to briefly acknowledge my Japan Studies colleague here, Professor Tomonori Nagano, who has been very helpful in planning this event, along with colleagues at Hunter College who helped make the connection between us here at LaGuardia and Mr. Furumoto. I also want to thank the LaGuardia faculty members who helped spread the word about this event. When we're not on campus, of course, it's often very difficult to share information about events. I know that we have students here today from my history courses. We have some anthropology and sociology students. We have faculty members, and I also want to extend a warm welcome to the program for deaf adults, along with their outstanding team of interpreters who are here today. I am Professor Robin Kietlinski. I teach world history here at LaGuardia, as well as East Asian history. And I'm truly humbled to welcome Mr. Takeshi Furumoto to our community today. Although I teach history as my job every day, I rarely have the opportunity to hear firsthand testimony from people who have lived through truly historic events. The forced internment of over 100,000 Japanese Americans during World War II was one such moment, and it represents a dark chapter of American history that many people are unfamiliar with. So I thank you all for joining us to learn more about this from Mr. Furumoto's firsthand perspective. I want to let Mr. Furumoto give his own introduction because his story is so rich and fascinating, and he has a wonderful slideshow of images that we're going to share. Before I turn the mic over to Mr. Furumoto, and my fingers are crossed that all the technical components work out, but please be patient with us if there are a few little technical glitches. Just a couple details I want to go over. Mr. Furumoto plans to talk between 40 and 50 minutes. And has some great images that I'll be sharing. Following this, there will be a period of questions and answers, during which I encourage all of you here to take advantage of this opportunity to interact with Mr. Furumoto. If you think of a question during his presentation, please either write it down to ask him afterwards, or you can write it in the chat box and I'll help moderate Q&A at the end. Finally, please keep yourself muted until the end. And also please note that this presentation is being recorded and archived in LaGuardia's archive. So again, please join me for a virtual round of applause as we welcome Mr. Furumoto to the LaGuardia community. Thank you. And let's mute me and unmute him.
Furumoto-san, you're muted. So you have to unmute with your cell phone. Use the cell phone and I think press 6.
Also, is there a way to pin the interpreters into the image so that we can be seen and recorded?
You're pinned, Susan. I think you're spotlighted. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the word I wanted. Thank you.
Okay. Shall I start now? Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Robin. Today, I will be talking about 80th anniversary of Executive Order 9066, which was signed February 19, 1942. And I'll be speaking about Executive Order 9066 a little over 50% of the time. And I will talk about life after, especially I lived in Hiroshima, Japan, 4 months after the atomic bombing. I could share some of the stories, just the highlights, because I'm going to talk mostly about Executive Order 9066. And when we went back to United States, I lived in South Central Los Angeles because Japanese Americans were not able to live in the nice areas. And after that, I like to share my story, how I was able to dream the American dream. I was in the right place at the right time when I started my real estate business. Now, Robin, could you start with the pictures, please? This is where I was born, October 20, 1944. And our family stayed here about 2 years. They were actually assembled in Los Angeles in 1942 May. And their first camp was lower in Arkansas. But this is where I was born. And this is where my life started. Now, some people ask me, you see the machine gun and a guard with a rifle. Was the live ammunition ever used? Answer is that yes, it was. In May of 1944, young men, they were supposed to work outside the camp. They were supposed to meet 7 o'clock at the gate, and he was late. So he started to chase the truck, and he was shot, and he was killed. The guard was exonerated, but this was one of the times that the live ammunition was used. Okay, next, please, Robin. The Executive Order 9066. This was signed on February 19th, 1942, right after the Pearl Harbor. President Roosevelt had signed this executive order, which gave Japanese American, Japanese nationals of the Japanese ancestry 10 days notice with one carry-on suitcase per person. Our family had lost everything, and this was due to a racial discrimination, which I will get to very shortly. Okay, next picture, please, Robin. Yes, this is Aiko Herzog Yoshinaga. In 1978, she uncovered a manipulated record, which in turn 120,000 persons of Japanese descent. The manipulated document proved that the Japanese American West Coast was not a threat to the security of the United States. Let me read some of the excerpts to prove this. Herzog Yoshinaga, who died July at age of 93, she was a singular hero in documenting the ugly truth that racism was at the heart of the incarceration. 3 weeks before she had died, my wife and I and my best friend, Richard Furukawa, we had lunch together in San Pedro, California. She lived in Torrance, and Richard lived in Gardena. We met at Gardena, and the word that she told me at the end is that this was criminal. What government did to the Japanese American was a criminal. I could still remember her saying that to me. One of the most significant documents she found was the original final report of General DeWitt, which was a key in proving that the government has submitted false and manipulated record of the Supreme Court in order to justify its actions. When the official in what was then called the War Department discovered that DeWitt's original report contradicted the government's position, they had DeWitt revise his report. The department ordered copies of it destroyed, and the revised version was given to the Supreme Court. This led to her discovery and recognized the one copy of the original report that had not been destroyed, helping to demonstrate the decision to remove the Japanese American was based on racism, not the military necessity. In 1983, large part based on Hirozaki Yoshinaga's tireless work, they issued Executive Order 9066 was not justified by military necessity. The broad historical causes which shaped this decision were race prejudice, war hysteria, and failure of the political leadership. On September 11th, 2001, attacks, today immigrants are again being branded as danger to the country. The minority communities continues to experience discrimination, hostility, and hate. And Supreme Court in the travel ban case recently has deferred to the president action carried out in the name of the national security, even in the face of evidence that they were motivated by prejudice. And I was thankful that I was able to see somebody who found this document, and the fact that we were in prison was a manipulated, fabricated report. Okay, Robin, I'd like to go to the next page, next photo. This is the letter I received from President Clinton. This is the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which President Reagan signed. And a lot of people ask me, why did Bill Clinton sign this? Well, I received this 5 years later because they were accompanied by $20,000 monetary compensation. And that took 5 years to do this. But let me just read this letter. This is the heart of today's topic of the Executive Order 9066, White House, Washington, October 1st, 1993. Over 50 years ago, the United States government unjustly in turn evacuated or relocated you and many other Japanese Americans. Today, on behalf of your fellow Americans, I offer a sincere apology to you for the actions that unfairly denied Japanese Americans their families' fundamental liberties during World War II. In passing the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, we acknowledge the wrongs of the past and offer redress to those who endure such grave injustice. In retrospect, we understand that the nation's action were rooted deeply in racial prejudice, wartime hysteria, and lack of political leadership. We must learn from the past and dedicate ourselves as a nation to renewing the spirit of equality and our love of freedom. Together, we can guarantee a future with liberty and justice for all. You and your family have my best wishes for the future. Bill Clinton. This was signed in 1993, but the U.S. Supreme Court did not rule this unconstitutional until 40 years later. It took the United States government 75 years to rule Executive Order 9066 unconstitutional. My only regret I have is that my parents, who has suffered so much, were not able to witness this. The $20,000 monetary compensation paid for my son's education in 1998, just the first semester at Georgetown University. The monetary compensation did not do anything. But the fact that this letter came to us, it was believed that we did nothing wrong. And this was led by Aiko Herzog, and 3 other gentlemen named Fred Korematsu. You could go to the next page now, Robin. Yes, Fred Korematsu, Minoru Yasui, and Gordon Hirabayashi. These 3 gentlemen were young men when they decided to defy this executive order 9066. Rather, they will spend their time in federal prison. They took this all the way to Supreme Court, but lost. But when the Supreme Court passed this these people has passed on. But as I mentioned earlier, I'll be talking about my challenge, my wife's challenge on Executive Order 9066. This was one of them. We passed this last year in January 16th, proclamation declaring the Fred Korematsu Day of Civil Liberties and Constitution in borough of Fort Lee. This was, by the way, passed overnight. As Mayor Sokoch said, this was a no-brainer. But the one that I had helped in the city of New York, it took 2 years. And 4 years ago, they were able to pass, and they recognized the day, January 30th, as Fred Korematsu Day of Civil Liberties and Constitution. And currently, my wife and I are working on New Jersey. The Senate has passed the Senate Resolution 95, which just passed, and Senate voted on it this year. On January 26th, it passed. And January 23rd this year, Assembly, led by Assemblyman Merkirch and Borelli, they had passed the resolution 182. That passed, but we're still waiting for the full assembly to vote on this. We're waiting for the vote to come shortly. Okay, next page, please, Robin. Before I get to the story about my family being in prison, I'd like to briefly talk about our family history, which has from 1911 to now. This is my father when he was about 7, 8 years old. He was left in Hiroshima, Japan, and taking care of their grandparents. And when and my grandparents, when they were young, they came to Florence, Sacramento, California, to grow strawberries, and he was left behind. This is Hiroshima, Japan. 30 years later, our family had lived here. There's a bridge behind it, and I walked about 10 minutes further to attend elementary school. There was a river over there where I used to go swimming. And this was my father. Okay, next page there, Robin, please. This is the boat, a freight boat, that my father came in 1921. This was right after the Spanish flu pandemic, which lasted 3 years. When he came to the United States, world had really a economic problem. And same thing in the United States. He was 13 years old when he came. And at age 14, he had to carry a blanket and be on his own to become a migrant farmer. At that time, when he came to the United States, he had younger sister and 2 younger brothers, and they could not afford to keep him at home. And he graduated from Florence Elementary School, which has first 8th grade education, and they had segregated schools. Those days, they had to pass the Exclusion Act for the Japanese. They could not own real estate, and they could not marry internationally. So my father had to go to Japan and marry my mother, which I get into that story a little bit later. But I think the Japanese Americans had very hard time in the United States. Okay, next page, please. My father, after 17 years, he was able to dream the American dream. He did have street smarts. He learned how to drive. He and his partner, Oka, Mr. Oka, started produce business. And he was living the American dream. But 4 years later, when the Executive Order 9066 was passed, he lost everything. He had to scratch. He had to start from zero. So when he went to the camp, he lost everything. And when he decided to go back to Hiroshima, Japan, he lost everything. And then when we came back to the United States in the 1950s, he lost everything. He had never, ever recovered. But however, his kids, us siblings, were able to dream the American dream. He never lost the focus on bringing us back, even though we're deported back to Japan. I use the word deported because anybody who did go back to Japan, they had to renounce their citizenship. My mother, who was born in America, had to renounce her citizenship. My father was born in Japan, but he could never come back. And we came back when my sister turned 21. She could recall the parents back to United States. Little by little, from 1952 to 1956, we came back to United States. As I mentioned, we lived in South Central Los Angeles. We were still into undesirable areas, but we studied hard, and we were able to realize our American dream thanks to my father, which really worked hard to get us this education. Next page, please. This is Assembly Center. This is a Santa Anita racetrack. This was May of 1942. This is the first place they went, Assembly Center in the racetrack, while they were building 10 different internment camps throughout the remote areas of the United States. And this was their first stop. And I remember my sister talking about during the summertime, how that the stable smelled so bad. But this was the first camp that they went. And they went with just one suitcase. And they were given 10 days notice. And my father and my family lost everything. Next page, please. Okay, the first camp that was built and went to was Lower Arkansas. They had 10 camps, as I mentioned, and they took our family by train. They had to put shades down. They wanted to make sure they were inconspicuous to the American public. But this is where they went in the winter of 1942 and 1943. After this, they moved to segregation camp that was called Tula Lake, and I will mention about what made them go to Tula Lake. The U.S. government had loyalty questions asked anybody who's over 17 years old. Specifically, question 27 and 28 were very unfair questions. 27 say, would you serve in the United States Army to defend this country? Of course, my father said no. He lost everything. His $4 locked in the camp. Says, no way I'm going to answer yes. And also, the question 28 says, would you disavow Emperor of Japan? This means he could never go back to Japan. And at that time, his parents and also my mother's parents had lived in Hiroshima, Japan. So they answered no. There were 10%, maybe less than 10% answered no to these questions. And they were sent to segregated, very heavily guarded camp in Tula Lake. 90% voted or said yes, or yes, no. they were not sent to the camp over there. The next page, please. Now, I want to mention the people over age 17 had to answer these questions. And many answered yes, yes, including this young man. They had volunteered to fight for United States government during the World War II. This was unveiled. This is a stamp which was unveiled this year, June 3rd, to dedicate their service. Their 442nd Regiment were the most decorated United States Army unit in the entire history of United States. And all of us are very proud of them. I know when I went to Vietnam War, the fact that we had such a track record as Americans, it made us a lot easier in the military. I was very grateful for that. Okay, next, please. Now we finally come to the point where I come into the picture. As you saw the guard tower for the first picture, this was where I was born. You see that Panda Bear came back all the way to Hiroshima, Japan. And when I saw this picture, the Panda Bear was quite white. But I remember the Panda Bear being very dark gray because probably nobody ever watched it. And right next to this was a passport picture, and then 6-month period, my hair grew quite a bit. But anyway, that was my passport picture that we took just before we left for Hiroshima, Japan. Next page, please. This was the last picture that we took in Tula Lake just prior to going back to Japan. This is the only picture we have our family together. And the one person that was missing, that's Margie, the little girl right next to there. So we took her picture right here. So this was the picture in Tula Lake segregation camp. Okay, next page, please. Now, our family decided to go back to Hiroshima, Japan, because my parents and also on my mother's side, my father's side, lived in Hiroshima, Japan. And one family was 2 miles from epicenter of the atomic bomb. The other family was 7 miles from epicenter. This is where we live. But this is USS General Gordon. This is a military army ship that carries about 5,000 people. And on this ship, there was 4,000 of us that went back to Japan. And some came back, and most of them, like my 2 uncles who was in the camp, never came back because of the treatment he had received. Okay, next page, please. This was the atomic bomb, August 6, 1945. And they had dropped another one 5 days later, which I couldn't understand why dropped another one, because this one evaporated 150,000 children, women, civilians, and some military. But 5 days later, they did the same thing. They evaporated 90,000 others. This is very harsh. Next page, please. This is where atomic bomb was the lower left. And then my mother's side lived only about 2 miles. That's near the Hiroshima train station. And I lived in Nishihara, Japan, where you saw my picture of my father near the river. And this is where we lived for 10 years, from January 1946 to May of 1956. Okay, next page, please. This is a picture we took when I was in Hiroshima. I was about 4 years old, and we had a hard time. My father had a job. He was a cook for the Army base. On the weekends, he helped my grandparents with the farming work. He worked 7 days a week, and we hardly had any clothes. So the middle picture, I mean, that's my summer clothes. We didn't put anything on. We went to school barefooted. In the right-hand side, there was a picture where the overcoat was handed down by 4 other sisters, and that came to me. That's the women's overcoat, but that kept us warm. My aunt, who worked in Harlem sweatshop, laundromat sweatshop, used to send us perhaps old clothes that kept us warm, send us coffee, send us candies, and I remember she sent us marbles, and I couldn't really play with the Northern kids because we're different. We're foreigners, so they didn't play with me. But my young age of 4 or 5, I used to pedal this marble so I could play with my friends in the neighborhood. I knew how to sell, and that's one of my reasons why I was very successful starting my own real estate business later on. I remember a story that our aunt sent. I don't know where she got it. She got a cowboy hat, cowboy boots, and a cowboy gun with a holster. And I was shocked, and she put this on me, and I showed it to my neighborhood kids, and I was king of the town here at that time. And I had promised one of the kids that I'm going to let you use that pistol next time I wear it. And 3-4 days later, I asked for the cowboy outfit, and my mother said, couldn't find it. And I remember I promised my neighbor kids that I'll let you use the pistol. And I cried all day. Later, I found out that she had taken that together with the coffee, the cowboy set with coffee and some other things, to black market in Hiroshima City to exchange for rice and bread so that she could feed us. I really didn't know until I was a lot older that she had to do that in order to survive. Just by looking at the pictures, bring back some memories. Okay, next page, please. Below is a picture of my classmates in 5th grade. This was 1955. There was 30 of us there, and a school teacher. Most of these kids were a hibakusha, which means atomic, a victim of atomic bomb. And just 2 years ago, I went back to reunion after 65 years, and only 10 showed up. I found out about this reunion is that when Obama came to visit Hiroshima, Japan about 5 years ago, first sitting president of the United States to ever visit to pay respect, I went back to my old school, this Gion Elementary School, and gave a speech of War and Peace about internment camp, about Hiroshima, Japan, and about my experience in Vietnam. And this hit the newspaper in front page. One of my classmates found out that it was me, and the teacher was still alive. So we had this class reunion 2 years ago. The picture above was my last day in Hiroshima, Japan, May of 1956. There was a train station in Hiroshima, Japan. Okay, next page, please. When we went back to Japan, as I mentioned, we went back to South Central LA. And of course, Japanese Americans at that time were still discriminated. And we lived in South Central. Today, it is the gang capital of the United States. But you could see mostly Blacks, Hispanics, and some Asians. And while I was growing up in Japan, I thought the United States had tall kids with blue eyes and blonde kids. And to my shock, this is what I saw, but we all became good friends. I mean, when you were a kid, you make friends overnight. Okay, next page, please. This is one brief moment. We went back to New York in 1959 for 3 months to help my aunt, who I told you used to send care packages. And she started the second Japanese restaurant in New York City, close to Columbia University. Our entire family went to help her. This was me at age 14. And I attended Joan of Arc Junior High School, 94th Street in Amsterdam. And I attended the Boy Scout camp 2 months in Adirondack. This is where later I came back from Vietnam. This was my refuge for my PTSD. Also, I didn't know about it at the time. This is the place where I was able to realize my American dream in New York City. Next page, please. This is a picture of myself at UCLA. And those days, the UCLA, which was one semester was only about $80, and turned to quarter system was still $80. I went to this school for less than $1,000. Even though it was less than $1,000, I worked part-time. Seriously, I was a key punch operator, so that I was able to commute, so I could pay for my car and so forth. And this was my last graduating undergraduate business class at UCLA. And after this, this year, that particular year, they were only graduate school, Anderson School of Business. My sisters went to junior college. At that time, it was only $5 a semester. They went 2 years of junior college and they transferred to a 4-year college. They went to USC and they got a scholarship. One became a doctor, medical doctor, other became a school teacher. I still remember my second older sister, who lives in a home now. She's 88. She went back to school when she was 28, and she became a high school teacher. All of us had very good work ethics. Thanks to our father, he showed us the way. Next page, please. This is a picture of myself, graduation from my Fort Belvedere Engineering Officer Candidate School. As I mentioned, President Nixon became a president, and he was pulling the troops out of Vietnam. Our entire class became intelligence officers. And I was so happy that I was intelligence officer. I thought, oh boy, I'm going to go Saigon, air-conditioned office. To my surprise, I was advisor on front line, living together with the Vietnamese and advisor to national police. And I was working with the Vietnamese troops. But this was a time that I met my wife, and I'll talk to her, about her later on. But that was December 1968 when I took a leave from the U.S. Army. I met her at the party, and we had the romance right after that. Right after the OCS, I went to 8 months Vietnamese language school, which was located in the city of Monterey, and I used to drive back 320 miles, 640 miles round trip to visit my wife, who was at junior college at that time. And not surprisingly enough, I came last in the language class because I chose romance over studying Vietnamese language. Okay, next page, please. This is a picture of our class with engineering OCS. All of us turned into military intelligence. You can notice there's only 2 minorities, 1 black kid and I was only Asian. Next page, please. This is a picture of the province right adjacent to Cambodian border. When President Nixon illegally went to Cambodian border, which is across this river over there, I was right in the heart of the Cambodian invasion. And this is where I think I picked up my PTSD. A gentleman next to me was Major Ebby, the first superior officer I had was a black. He was ambushed and he was wounded in the knees and he was sent back to United States. In Vietnam, this was the first war where blacks fought together with white. And when I was an officer over there, a lot of white kids gave me a problem, but because I did attend elementary school and a lot of black kids, they were my bodyguards. It's funny how things turn out. Okay, next page. This is why I was decorated with Bronze Star, probably because of the actions in Vietnam. And I came back, even though I was decorated, I came back with PTSD and I was exposed to Agent Orange. To this day, I have to take about 10 pills every morning because of my Agent Orange, and I had 2 heart surgeries because of Agent Orange. But I'm not sorry because that was my duty to defend this country. And so I had done that. Just like the Japanese American during World War II, they had served in this country. Even though their families were locked up in the camp, they served to become the top unit in the history of the United States. Okay, next page, please. This was a picture of my wife. She helped me through, and I still remember right after we got married, Tack, 3 months later, she said, Tack, this is the biggest mistake I ever made in my life. Well, of course, she was right because I had a PTSD and she was my punching bag. I didn't physically attack her, but still psychologically and mentally, I must have been really tough on her, but she nursed me through. I made it. It took about 7, 8 years, but without her, I may be in Manhattan, just like other Vietnam vets, be homeless. But I have to be grateful for her, even though she told me that was the biggest mistake that she made in her life. But I don't know, somehow next year, January 30th, we'll be married 50 years, our 50th anniversary. I don't know how we did it, but we did it. Next page, please. This is first office I had in June of 1974. $100 office without any windows. I could not hold a job because I had a PTSD and I could not focus, and I used to get terminated, and my wife had to work odd jobs. But this is real estate office. Real estate with 2 years experience, if you pass the broker's course, you could start your own business. And I was in the right place at the right time. At that time, Japan became number 2 economic power, and they had bought buildings in one hand, buying golf courses. And every morning, I used to pinch myself in the cheek and said, geez, am I dreaming? But this happened to me in 1970s, early 70s, and 1980s, when Japan had bought the United States. Next page, please. This is the article in the Manhattan Inc. Our office was #1 selling Donald Trump's Trump Park. Was a condo conversion. We saw at least about 30. And this was the time I met Donald Trump for the first time. As always, he's very condescending. I stay away from him, but
Mr. Furumoto, you're frozen. We'll give you a second to hopefully reconnect. Can people hear me? Uh-oh, okay. Nagano Sensei, if you can help with the tech support. Oh, he cut out. So
Yeah. Maybe we should use either we wait for him to come back or use his cell phone.
Okay. Sorry, guys.
Let's
thank
wait
you for your
because
patience.
it worked well so far, so maybe we should wait.
Yeah. Okay. I know he has 5 or 6 more slides. Oh, and yeah, thank you for your patience, Leona.
So maybe it's a good time to, chat, send the questions to the chat.
Yeah. If people start thinking about questions, feel free to put them in the chat box so that when he hopefully comes back, we can follow up his presentation with questions. Yeah, it looks like he has 5 more slides left. And when we were having issues prior to his presentation, he was able to log back in pretty quickly. So hopefully he comes back. Here we go.
I see him now. I'm going to move to the stage.
Oh, Furumoto-san, we can hear you again, I think. Are you there?
He's muted.
Yeah, we can see you're here, but we can't hear. Oh, there you are. You're muted.
There's something you have to press to unmute yourself when you call in to Zoom on the phone.
Yeah, it's like
something.
*6 or something.
Maybe we need to tell him that. He may hear you, but not know what Zoom thing to press.
Oh, this might be. Can you try speaking, Mr. Furumoto? We still can't. No, we can't hear you yet. We see you. There we go. Okay, I think we can hear you now.
Oh.
Yes, okay. I think we can hear you now, Mr. Furumoto.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. Okay. So the next page is, I believe, Oprah Winfrey. Yeah, this is the Japanese bashing. I was interviewed together with the first Japanese American general and also president of Japanese American Citizens League for 1 hour. And where I was interviewed because I was interviewed by New York Times when I was bashed because New York Times used to call me a lot because the Japanese were buying properties in Manhattan. And when I was bashed, it covered the story in the newspaper. And that's how Oprah Winfrey found me. So that's how I went. And then I was mentioning this is the second hate crime the United States ever had. And of course, the third one is happening now where the Japanese Americans are being targeted in the hate crime. But I think the worst that I ever faced was one where we got locked up for no reason at all. Okay, next page, please. This is a picture about, let me see, about 10 years ago, state of New Jersey, people of authority finally said, thank you very much for serving in Vietnam. This was really a closure for me. This is the first time that I know when we came back from Vietnam, we were really hated. I mean, we weren't treated good at all. But this was the first time that I felt heavy shoulder off my back. Right after this, I joined VFW in Fort Lee, and also I joined the Japanese American Veterans Association in New York. They're the one that the 442nd was the most decorated in the United States. But this was good that they did give us medals and so forth thank us. Okay, next page, please. And this was one of the many decorations at that time we received. I received another one, Congressional Medal, and so forth. Okay, next page, please. And this is one of my accolades from town of Fort Lee. I received this about 5 years ago, the key to the city of Fort Lee. I came here in 1971, and like borough of Fort Lee was like Cherries and Peace. I don't know if you watched Forrest Gump. They had, when I came back with PTSD, they had treated me so well. This is where I was able to really do business, and I'm very grateful. The next page, please. Okay, I'm gonna call my wife right now. Because today's story is so dark, and I want to kind of add a little light into today's story. This was written by my friend a couple months ago, and I want to read. Oh, please, first, I want to. Can you see her? Yeah, it's my wife. We've been, I don't know, but we've been married for in 2 months for 50 years. I don't know. Without her, I don't know where I would have been. But anyway, let me read this. You could probably read it too, but she wrote it and she sent me a frame and picture. Oh, the magic of the dance. It was cha-cha-cha that brought two hearts together who met all those years ago. A shy, handsome soldier and a very pretty young lady. That is their love story, something that happened over 50 years ago. Keep the music playing. And may God bless you both. Run for TAC and Carol from our family. August 20, 2021. It's the best thing that happened to me. Now, before we go on question and answers, I'd like to conclude the story. Sorry, I got really emotional.
Take your time, Mr. Fudamoto, but also you're muted right now. We all want to hear your final words before questions and answers. Thank you.
Okay. Is that okay?
Yes, that's good. Thank you.
Well, this was the darkest part of American history. Something that's fabricated. You put 120,000 innocent women and children in prison. This should never, ever happen. This must be told. And thank you, Robin, for having me in your history class, because I wanted to tell the story. And like my wife and I are challenging this. Like I said, it's city of New York, borough of Fort Lee, now New Jersey. Right after this, if I like to go to Washington, D.C., the executive order was passed when they're imprisoned Japanese Americans. Maybe perhaps President Biden could sign executive order. You could sign executive order like buying a popcorn in this country. But I think that they should be recognized so that next American will not have to face what the plight of a Japanese American has faced for so many years. So I think, like today, Robin, it is so important. We must safeguard our Constitution. And United States leads the world in diversity. Not easy, but we're here to stay. We have no place to go. It is a great country, but we gotta make it a great country. And again, thank you for sharing and letting me share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Furumoto. And I'm sure if we weren't virtual, you would have a standing ovation right now, because that was a truly wonderful and very, very memorable presentation. And I know that all 76 people who are watching you right now are going to remember your words and your emotion. And I really do appreciate you being here today and sharing. So yeah, I see some virtual applause here, but I would love to actually hear from some of our audience members. I'm happy to moderate Q&A. So I know that there are going to be people with questions, and we have, I believe you've agreed to stay for up to about another half an hour. So yeah, please, if people could use their little hands. Actually, I'm going to stop
Robin,
the share.
there's a question in the chat about about his family's return to Japan from Tula Lake.
Okay, sorry, I missed that question. Would you mind asking it, Nagano?
Stephen, do you want to ask a question, or?
Did you hear me now?
We do, yes.
Yes, my question was, well, firstly, thank you for such a powerful presentation. It's a truly incredible story of your life, but I was not clear why your family left the U.S. to go back to Japan, to Hiroshima, after World War II, whether it was because this was voluntary or was your family expelled due to your father's responses to questions 27 and 28.
Okay. One, that my father's parents lived in Japan. He's the oldest son. And two, my sisters in Tula Lake Segregation Center, they were learning about they were learning Japanese language, history, the culture. They even sang Japanese national songs. They said, well, we're ready for Japan, but they weren't the main reason. But it was the decision that it was the wrong decision, no question about it. We went back there, we had a hard time. But for me, learning the Japanese language, I was able to sell to the Japanese in the 1980s. That was a great thing. I mean, that was great for me. But he had a hard time. But it was a voluntary thing. That's why, like my mother lost her citizenship. They called it renunciation. But actually, she was not able to come back. And I like to call that a tacit deportation. Us kids were deported back because we had to stick together with the parents. That was the wrong decision, absolutely. But for me, it was great because I spoke Japanese and I didn't have too much competition back in the 1970s because Japanese from Japan, Japanese nationals could not come to the United States unless you had a letter of recommendation. So I didn't really have too much competition at that time. Now I have plenty of competition. I don't know if that answers your question. It was voluntary.
Thank you very much. Yes, yes. But going back to Hiroshima after the war, I mean, it was totally destroyed. How did your family ever survive this?
Well, my grandparents did have a farm. Even though if they harvested the rice or vegetables, was taken away, and then we had to share this with the rest of the country. But, my father worked at U.S. Army base as a cook, and he used to cut the edges of those bread. He used to put them in the pillow case, he used to bring it back at nighttime, and also like my aunt from New York City, she was working at the thrift shop, a laundromat. She used to send us coffee and stuff like that. She knew that my mother would go to the black market and sell the coffee for rice or maybe bread. So, she that way she brought this back. It was tough. It was really tough. But for me, I grew up since I was toddler, so it wasn't too bad. For anybody who came back from the United States, it must have been horrible. Like my sisters who used to living, comfortably before we went to the, camp. So, yeah, we had a hard time. Absolutely. I
Thank you
was skin
so
and
much.
bones.
Yes, thank you so much.
More questions? If people have their little hand reaction, it'd be great. There was one question in the chat box about what is Agent Orange, and what was the outcome for you?
Agent Orange, during the Vietnam War, there was a spray that killed the trees. In order for us to detect weapon cache from above, we have to kill these trees because there are so many jungles. And United States would use this Agent Orange. They used to spray it, and that would kill the trees, and we would be able to see what's underneath. If there's a movement from North Vietnam or Viet Cong, we could see the movements. That's why. But unfortunately, the Agent Orange are affected not only Vietnamese. Babies are born crippled and so forth. That affected us too. There are 17 ways they could. I get disability from the U.S. Army because I have a diabetes and also I have a coronary. These are one of the preconditions for Agent Orange, and because of this, a lot of Vietnam veterans, especially exposed to Agent Orange, they're dying at a pretty fast pace right now.
The person who asked that question says thank you. We have another question in the chat box. It says, how did you stay so strong and pursue the American dream despite all the discrimination and racism that you face? That's a great question.
It is a great question. I used to watch my father working 7 days a week. He had a good work ethics. He's gone through hell. Yeah, he made it, but after that, he couldn't, do anything. But he gave us education, and we try our damnedest, and we work hard. For me, taking care of the Japanese clients and so forth, because we went back to Hiroshima, I was able to speak the language. That really helped. And if I'm going to UCLA, I used to work 20 hours a week and going full time. Well, because of my parents, they worked so hard. They had hard ethic. Of course, I didn't make any friends. I didn't join any fraternity clubs or dormitories, but nevertheless, I was able to graduate. That got me into officer candidate school. I became an officer, and that taught me leadership. All these things because of parents. I'm blessed, not only my wife, but my father. Thank you.
It's great how you're able to see the positive out of so many difficult experiences in your life. It is very powerful, I think, for all of us here to see, the good that you've taken out of all of these situations. Do we have more questions? If anyone wants to unmute I know it's a lot to process, and I think for some students, especially those raised in America who are not familiar with this, it can be kind of overwhelming even to learn that this happened in the pretty recent past. But do people have other questions about the history generally, or about Mr. Furumoto's experience? Oh, I see Julene has her hand up. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. And Mr. Furumoto, thank you so much for coming to share your story. And it's a really important piece of American history. Today, I'm sure you're aware, there's a debate in the American public about how we teach American history in schools, especially things regarding racism or the injustices that this country has perpetuated, including upon your family. What kinds of thoughts do you have about what young people should be taught so we can remember this history? Thank you.
As I said in my speech, when President Obama went back to Japan, paid respect to all the victims of atomic bombing. And I was able to go back to my elementary school. And at the time, the principal of the school gave me opportunity to talk to some of the students. At the time, Hiroshima, Japan had so-called peace class. This was mandatory 5th and 6th graders that was taught about World War II, about Hiroshima and stuff like this. And these kids knew a lot more about problems like Hiroshima. And they were really shocked to hear about our story about camp. And I talked about Vietnam, Agent Orange, and this and that. And they had some great questions. And I just want to mention this. This should be an example of America too. The question that was posed was, how can you create peace? This one young man says, Mr. Furumoto, it's not too bad. Adults think too hard. He would put arm around the kid right next to him. He says, be friends with him. Be nice to him. That's peace. And that was a great answer. This came from 5th and 6th graders. I think something like that, peace class, to learn the history, maybe at elementary school level. I think that is very important.
I have a follow-up question, which is, do Japanese students learn about this part of U.S. history? I know, of course, in any country, you tend to learn your own national history more so than the history of other countries, but because this is related to Americans of Japanese descent, do you know if the history books in Japan mention this at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. They don't know it. In fact, I was recently approached by Mainichi Shimbun, which is like the New York Times and Washington Post, and he knew about the 80th anniversary of the Executive Order 9066, February 19th, 1942. He wanted to interview somebody who had or family had experienced the internment camp about this, how it treated, and how should the Japanese people also should know about this. Well, I mean, because of Pearl Harbor, this happened, this and that, but that's not really the point. The point is this history is very important throughout the world. So I think that hopefully he'll write a nice article and at least to propagate some of the information about Executive Order 9066. I think it's important that all the world should know about this.
I see Professor Baldwin Jones, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Furumoto. We used to have a section in the anthropology textbook, but the new book that came out last year doesn't have it anymore, about the Japanese internment camp, because there was a Japanese anthropologist who was actually living in a camp and documenting what happened. So I am most grateful that you're here to talk to us about what happened. It's even more powerful than reading it. And that, I brought my class to here. So thank you very much.
And your question was?
No, I'm just making a comment. We used to have it in I teach anthropology, and there was a section in our anthropology textbook looking at race relations and talking about the Japanese internment camp. But the new textbook actually removed that. So in a way, we're sort of going backwards, losing this history. So having you here with the oral history is very powerful and meaningful.
So the next step I'm thinking about is, I don't know if this will work, but I'll keep on trying. I have to have my track record. I did go to New York City, and I was able to pass it, and to Fort Lee was able to pass it. Hopefully, within the next.
Fred Korematsu,
Yeah, Fred Korematsu. Also, Salem, New Jersey. Hopefully, within the next 2 months. I like to go to Washington D.C. And I like to have the day of Executive Order 9066. And part of that, about the school, about learning, about some of the history of what happened to people. And if the politicians at the top are fabricating a story to create something like this, this is something that is very important. You're right. And we have to do something about it. And I like to do something about it myself.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that is a really interesting observation about that unit being removed. I'm going to read another question in a moment. I just want to make a quick plug for LaGuardia students. If you have not had a chance to go to the Noguchi Museum, which is within walking distance of LaGuardia's campus. He was a very famous half Japanese, but Japanese American artist and designer and architect in the early and mid 20th century. But he also had a whole thing about internment, and he voluntarily interned himself, and he did some very interesting things to raise awareness, because also remember, on the East Coast, many Asian Americans and Japanese Americans were kind of indirectly but not so directly impacted. And so Isamu Noguchi was one of the most famous Japanese Americans at that time. And there was a very interesting exhibit at the Noguchi Museum in Long Island City, which was also the location of his actual workshop. So for those of you who want to learn a little bit more about Japanese American history and a famous local Japanese American and his involvement with the internment camps, I encourage you guys to visit that museum now that people are doing stuff again. I see a question here from Belle. It says, with the negativity projected towards Japanese Americans during that time, was there a special moment of acceptance you felt from somebody who wasn't of Japanese descent, who gave you hope for a better or progressive future where everybody is more accepting of difference?
There was Governor Carr of Colorado was very accepting, and he did felt sorry for us. He did do something about it during the World War II, but the next term he was not elected. I don't know. The public has to answer for this. When the public sentiment is so strong against somebody, it's very difficult. But you have to keep on trying. and not give up. I think, like for us to defend the Constitution, it is a great country, but we have to be proactive and make it great. We got a lot of jobs to do. We got a long ways to go, but this country leads the rest of the world in this diversity. Not easy. You know, what happens if aliens, maybe Mars, who kind of attacked us right now, maybe the entire world will come together, the entire United States will come together. I don't know.
There's a kind of related question, and then I see Professor Fernandez also has his hand up. But one question relatedly is: do you think the American dream is still alive today?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, whether in business, whether in art, whether in theater. Oh, I think it's a great country. I mean, you got to go to the rest of the world and travel the world to see what a great country America is for opportunity. So, oh, absolutely. Why
that's
would
good to
America
hear.
be dead? You know, I mean, hey, it's still here. It's there. What do you think all these immigrants are risking their lives come to this country because the American dream? Even my father, even though he was a migrant farmer, he was able to, and with 8th grade education, he was able to get up. You know, other people have it so bad compared to the United States. So again, American dream should be alive and well, should be, and will be.
I hope you appreciate this. Your talk and your life story is an inspiration to many of the students who are here today. I see Professor Hugo Fernandez, you have your hand up. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I could hear you.
Could you talk a little bit about the reparations program that was put together, and what you think the impact of that has been? And because a lot of people are thinking about it as a model for a reparations program for African Americans whose families suffered as a result of being slaves in this country. Do you think the reparations program for Japanese Americans who were interned has been, was it a good thing? Did it have an impact?
Well, I don't know about impact. Like I mentioned, $20,000 paid for my son's education, one semester, 6 months of college education. But that's not the point. I think reparation, no matter how much, how can you repay somebody for last period of time? With dignity, family, you can't. There's no way to measure it. I know this year I wrote a letter to Washington, D.C. about the HR program for the Blacks. I mean, yes, certainly anybody like that we should be able to. I testify, comparing that with the Japanese, yes, but how much is enough? I don't know how much impact it will have. I think that I really don't. I cannot answer that. How much? I really can't.
And not everybody got it. Only people who were alive.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. Thank you. Leena, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Furumoto and Mrs. Furumoto. Just on behalf of my class, I teach art history here. So our introduction to art class is also here. We want to thank you so much for your fascinating presentation. Your life just spans incredible periods of history, and to hear it from an inside perspective and your everything you've been able to accomplish and the impacts on your life and how you've transformed the negative into the positive in your life is truly inspirational and very touching. So we thank you for that. And please know that what you say is going to reverberate in our classes. We're going to continue this afternoon learning about Japanese American artists like Ruth Osawa and Isamu Noguchi, yes, who had his studio and his museum is here in Long Island City, Queens. And there's also a new wave of graphic novels coming out, including one recently that came out about the resistors to Executive Order 9066. It was fascinating to hear you mention those who resisted and took jail time instead of internment. That was very fascinating. So thank you so much for sharing your story on behalf of our 25 students who are here from the art program. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing your class. There is a follow-up question, I think, to something you were saying, Mr. Furumoto. What is it specifically that Japanese Americans are still battling for in court?
Many people, for us, we're lucky. We came out, we had a rough time, yes, but we're lucky. We're one of the success stories. How about others who end up being crazy? And how about the others who still have vengeance against them? America, But through education, through our experience, we have to keep on telling the story. I think it will take time. But again, like time today, for example, is so important so that you could relate some of the problems. But, you can say, well, it's a problem. Well, you got to do something about it. You got to keep on trying to make it better. And hopefully we could accomplish something later on.
Yeah, I agree. And if every, 70 plus person, like if all of the participants here today just have one conversation with somebody else and share your story and something impactful from your life story, that does reverberate and it does help you. And I agree with what others have said, that hearing this firsthand testimony is so much more powerful than reading it in a book, and very, very memorable. And again, we're so grateful. Before we wrap up, I just want to make sure that I gave everybody a chance who had a question to ask it. Any other questions? I don't know if you're able to see the chat box, Mr. Furumoto, but there have been just a lot of comments in the chat box congratulating you guys on your 50th anniversary, thanking you for your openness in sharing your story. And I think if there are no other questions, I want to again thank you so much for joining us for this important presentation. Do you have any concluding remarks you want to make?
Thank them for all these questions and comments. It is a therapy for me too. Talk about it is a therapy, and also it's a joy being able to express your experience. So it was good for me too. It was great for my wife.
Well, again, so many people are saying this was really, powerful and inspirational. Your life story, your love story, it's all really, really wonderful that you were able to come share it with us. This presentation is going to live on in the archives at LaGuardia Community College. And, hopefully for many years to come, people will be able to see this firsthand account that you've provided us. So thank you so much. And I want to wish you luck with all of the efforts. It's also an inspiration that you continue to fight for justice. And I don't know, Nagano Sensei, if you want to conclude with anything else. But again, I just feel very, very grateful that we were able to all come together for this today. And I want to personally thank you, and thank you from the LaGuardia community.
Thank you, Robin, for giving us opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for those wondering about accessing the recording, we'll try to distribute that information as soon as we can. But it has been recorded and it will be archived. So we'll figure out about how to distribute that. So yeah, thank you again, Mr. Furumoto, and thank you to everybody for coming. Enjoy the rest of this beautiful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.